I'm going to call this meeting of the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights to order. It gives me great pleasure to welcome, sitting in for Ms. Khalid, Mr. Frank Baylis. Mr. Baylis, welcome to our committee. And also Mr. Randeep Sarai, who is sitting in for Mr. Randeep Boissonnaud. Randeep, great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you.
And of course, it's always great to have Ted Falk here, even though he's a regular.
Good job.
So in any case, today we are beginning our study of Bill C-305, an act to amend the Criminal Code Mischief, which is sponsored by Mr. Chandra Arya, who is here with us today. Welcome, Mr. Arya. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We very much look forward to studying this very interesting piece of proposed legislation. So we're going to start by inviting you to make your remarks. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here with you to speak on Bill C-305. Thank you all for the unanimous support last week in the House. Canada is an inclusive nation. We welcome people from all over the world, irrespective of race, religion, color, or creed. That regardless of where you're from, or what you are, or what you believe, you'll be treated with respect in Canada. However, we are reminded every time we witness acts of hatred that Canada is not at where we want it to be. Acts of hatred based on race, religion, sexual identity, and sexual expression have not subsided. In fact, they have been increasing. We had certain dark episodes in our country. The Chinese head tax, the internment of Ukrainian, Japanese, and Italian Canadians during the First and Second World Wars, our turning away boards of Jewish and Punjabi refugees, our own history of slavery, no Irish need apply. We don't speak French here, so speak white. The discrimination faced by Greek and Portuguese Canadians in Toronto and other places. The same rhetoric that led to a none is too many immigration policy towards Jews in the 30s and 40s is being used to raise fear against Muslims today. There has been discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity for a very long time. The Criminal Code once described gay men as criminal sexual psychopaths and dangerous sexual offenders. In the 60s, we deployed the RCMP to investigate suspected homosexuals. This discrimination still exists in parts of Canadian society today. While C-305 will not solve every issue related to racism or discrimination, it will take an important small step in protecting the most vulnerable. There is hope, Mr. Chair. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." Our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said, "For all our instructive moments of failure, the arc of Canadian history bends towards inclusion, towards liberty." Bill 305 seeks to amend a subsection of the Criminal Code which deals with damages to property due to crime motivated by hate based on religion, race, color, national or ethnic origin. This bill proposes to expand this to include motivation by hate based on gender identity and sexual orientation. Also, the subsection is primarily currently it is limited to places of worship like churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, and cemetery. The proposed bill, C-305, seeks to expand it to include schools, daycare centers, colleges or universities, community centers, seniors residences, and cultural centers. Under this criminal subsection, if a person is found guilty of an indictable offense, the prison term is up to 10 years. If a person is found guilty of an offense punishable on summary conviction, the prison term is up to 18 months. Few months back, we had a series of hate crimes in Ottawa. Then, several religious leaders stated that education and compassion are more important than law and the consequent punishment to eliminate and eradicate these hatred acts from our society. However, while I agree that education is the best long-term solution, I also believe a strong law acts as a major deterrent. We have, as a society, combated social issues like smoking, seatbelt through effective combination of law and education. At this point, I would like to quote Dr. Martin Luther King on the interaction between positive law, morality, and culture. He said, "It may be true that morality cannot be legislated, but behavior can be regulated. It may be true that the law cannot change the heart, but it can restrain the heartless. It may be true that the law can't make a man love me, but it can restrain him from lynching me." So while the law may not change the hearts of men, it does change the habits of men. And when you change the habits of men, pretty soon the attitudes and hearts will be changed. And so there's a need for a strong legislation constantly to grapple with the problems we face. So it is very important that we have strong and robust law for hate crimes. Again, I agree education is important, but I am equally confident that good law is also required. Bill C-305 takes a strong step to making our neighborhoods and communities a safer place to live. Think of the strong message we would be sending to all Canadians that not select people, but all people of Canada can feel safer knowing that this Parliament has taken concrete and strong measures to protect them. There are some alarming statistics which I would like to share with you today. As per a Statistics Canada report released in 2015, it was noted 51% of the police reported hate crimes were motivated by hatred of race or ethnicity. 28% was motivated by religion and 16% by sexual orientation. It is easy to forget that hate-based mischief does not only affect the targeted group or individuals, it affects the community as a whole. There was a recent study by the Department of Justice of Canada on the understanding the community impact of hate crimes. It stated the commission of a hate crime is against not only the individual, but the entire community. It quoted Davis Matas, "People live in community. Rights are exercised in community." With victims of hate crime, it is important to consider that the impact on the community is particularly devastating, as hate crimes are message crimes in that the perpetrator is sending a message to the members of a certain group that they are despised, devalued, or unwelcome in a particular neighborhood, community, school, or workplace. The data also showed that after the hate crime incident, many people experienced increased levels of fear for their personal safety and for the safety of their family. As a result, many community members took measures to protect themselves and their family, especially members of the targeted ethnic identity community. We need to take appropriate measures to ensure that our neighborhoods are a safe place to live, that every Canadian has the right to feel safe, to live their life in the absence of fear or threat. Let us remember that Canada is a nation strengthened by its multiculturalism and shared values of openness, compassion, and equality. To not be subjected to hate and discrimination, but to feel welcome. This bill may not solve every issue, but it can attempt to bring solace to those targeted by hate crimes. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. It's up to you to decide what to do next. I expect some friendly amendments and also expect some resistance from the government. You're all well qualified. I'm happy that this bill is in your good hands. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arya. Very much appreciated your remarks. And now we will start with some questions. We will start with Mr. Nicholson.
Well, thank you very much. you're expecting some resistance from the government. Did you want to elaborate? It's usually the opposition parties that you're going to get, but I would have guessed, but not lately. No, fair enough. I'll get to that in a second here. I want to tell you how pleased I am to see that you include in your list of religious properties, including educational institutes and community facilities and seniors' residences. This is very good because hate crimes don't necessarily have to be directed at a mosque or a temple or a church or a synagogue. You know what I mean? That's not the only place where, religious activity is encouraged. So I think that is a great step forward here, and I very much appreciate that. The question I wanted to ask you relates to on this subject, but by the former parliamentary secretary. He said that the bill could potentially capture numerous unintended buildings and spaces. What is your response to that?
Going back to my remarks on resistance from the government, I'm confident with the opposition parties, the Conservatives and NDP joined hands with us to unanimously support this bill. However, the remarks from the parliamentary secretaries caused me a bit of a concern. This bill does not try to cover every single property. For example, the coffee shops is not covered here. There are so many other properties. The point I made in my remarks is that the hate crimes does not affect the individuals or the families or a particular group, but it makes the community feel unsafe. And, to state that a hate crimes against the Catholic school board building is different from the hate crimes against a district school board building, in my view, is not correct. So I am not trying to cover every single private property or a private business here. I'm trying to cover all the public properties, especially where the communities gather, the community centers, the schools, and other places.
Be a good example. You said if somebody has a problem with Catholics, it's a hate crime, or it's an additional measure to measure how difficult or terrible the crime is if it was, say, a church or a Catholic church. But if you went after a Catholic school, I mean, that's what you'd be including on this.
Not just the Catholic school. I want to include all schools because that's where the communities gather. When a hate crime is done against a property, a school which is not Catholic,
yes,
and the effect on the entire community will feel unsafe.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you get any from the former parliamentary secretary, how any wording changes that you...
No, not yet.
You didn't get that, okay. Fair enough. There are some questions with respect to consistency with the provisions of the criminal code, and I believe one of my colleagues in the NDP, Mr. Garrison, has a possible amendment. Have you had a chance to have a look at that?
No, not yet.
Not yet? Okay. Well, thank you very much. I again congratulate you for bringing forward to this. As I say, I think it's more expansive than the present wording that's within the legislation here, and I think this will be an improvement for this. So thank you very much. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Well, you could after, but I was just wondering if anybody uncharacteristically, Mr. Nicholson only took up about half of his time.
No, come on now. That's...
Well, no,
that's
it's because
unfair,
you're always so to the point.
Okay.
Mr. Cooper, do you want to take the rest of the time?
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Area, for appearing and for your presentation. Let me say at the outset that I think the intent of this bill is a good one, and I certainly support it. And I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned a couple of months ago there were a whole series of hate crimes that were committed, targeted at religious groups. I think a mosque was targeted, a Jewish community center was targeted, among others, here in Ottawa. Now, and so I'm correct that it wasn't just houses of worship that were targeted, it was community centers. Is that right in terms of what happened in the Ottawa incident?
Yes, in Ottawa, the mosques were targeted, the synagogues were targeted, plus there was some private buildings also targeted. At the same time, I may be slightly wrong there was a community center that was targeted. at least a building that was used as a community centers, but it also is also used as a place of worship. The current subsection, if the building is if the property is associated with the place of worship, that is covered. But when it is only a community center, that is not covered. As I mentioned earlier, when a community center or a school is targeted, the effect on the communities is the same.
And so, how much time, Chair? Never minute. So, right now, then, under Section 430 of the Criminal Code, if someone committed an act of mischief, that individual, in say the Ottawa case, at the house of worship, they would be subject to a penalty of up to 10 years imprisonment. But if they committed the very same act of vandalism targeted at the same group at, say, a Jewish community center instead of a synagogue, they would only be subject to 2 years of imprisonment. Is that
Absolutely.
correct? And that's the loophole in the criminal
Yes,
code
absolutely.
that your bill seeks to close. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely, you're correct.
Good. Thank you.
Very clear. Thank you very much. Mr. McKinnon.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Arya, for bringing forward this bill. I appreciate the effort, and I support the intent. In the first clause here, you mention you've added gender identity and sexual orientation, but you did not add gender expression. I wonder if that was deliberate or whether that was an oversight.
It was an oversight.
Okay. All right. Second, I'm interested in the scope of the buildings that you're intending this to apply to. Part C of your proposed 4.101, a building or structure or part of a building or structure that is primarily used for administrative, social, cultural, or sports activities or events, and including town halls, community centers, playgrounds, arenas, and so on and so forth. There's no tie-in here to whether they are associated with any religious affiliation at all. So it would seem to be applying to not only all public buildings, or a great number of public buildings, but a great number of private buildings as well. It's not very, I wonder if it's perhaps too expansive.
My thing is that the subsection saying that this against the religious properties can be amended to say that religious and public properties.
But Part C doesn't mention that these buildings are anything to do with any religion. It's just.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't specifically mention. I would rather, if I had to redraft the bill, I would have redrafted it as crime against religious or public properties.
So you intend it to mean all public properties, like city properties, provincial properties, federal properties?
Basically, those properties where the community gathers.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Basically, any property where the community gathers, for example, the school or the community centers or the cultural centers.
Okay. So I know in my writing there are a number of churches who don't have their own premises. They rent space on a regular basis in commercial premises. Would this bill apply to those specific premises, or would they apply, and if so, would they apply just to those premises or to the entire structure?
Good question. In fact, this question came up after I introduced the bill. I don't have an answer. I know that's not specifically covered in my private member's bill.
So there are a number of groups and categories mentioned in the definition of mischief in hate speech, but buildings and structures relating to those other groups other than religions and other than public properties are not referenced in any way. So perhaps if I had a ethnic cultural center of some kind, it's not a public building, but it might be something that hate graffiti might be sprayed upon. Would that would, in my reading of this, would not be covered by this bill?
If it is a cultural center, at least in my limited knowledge, is a public property. I don't know if it is can be considered as a private property. Unfortunately, I don't have a correct answer for that.
Okay, what about, say, a commercial premises that's rented by a group promoting, say, racial equality?
Yep.
That would not be, seem to be...
No, that does not seem to be covered in this bill, no.
Is that something that you think should be incorporated in this bill?
Can be considered, yes.
Okay.
Basically, what I'm trying to say is that this bill will act as an agent which allows you to expand, to strengthen, to achieve the main objectives.
So one of the questions provided by our great analysts is the idea that a graffiti painted on a park bench in a public playground would be subject to this act, but the same thing done on a private playground or a private residence would not. So there'd be quite a disparate treatment between those two cases. Do you think that's an appropriate
I
situation?
agree with that. There's still, as I was mentioning, the hate crimes that happened in Ottawa, there was graffiti against a private home and graffiti against a place of worship. So these two are treated separately, though the end effect is the same. End effect was that the community felt unsafe. Yes, that is an issue.
Okay. I guess one final question here. You mentioned seniors' residences, and I agree that with Mr. Nicholson that seems to be logical, included with the other range of public buildings. What about youth centers and so forth?
Look, at the end of the day, my objective is not to get limited. I want to be as open, as wide as possible. If there are any amendments, it will be good.
So you'd be happy if this provision applied to any building anywhere?
The public buildings, community buildings, yes.
Yeah? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McKinnon. Mr. McGregor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Arya, I'd like to congratulate you again on your success at getting your bill passed unanimously in the House, and welcome to the committee. Now, it's already been raised that you reported already to this committee that not including gender expression was an oversight.
Yeah.
I think your bill has got laudable goals, but my concern overall is that we seem to be fixing individual trees and losing sight of the forest, because if you look at Bill C-16 and the Criminal Code, there's also provisions in there for prohibiting discrimination based on sex. And your bill also forgets to include that particular part. Is that something that you were made aware of, or is that another
In
oversight?
fact, after I presented the bill, several of these things came up, and I told I'm always open for friendly amendments. Yes, this, I should say that I had to rush through it at the last moment.
Yeah, because like, the thing that comes to mind for me is in my riding of Couch and Malhat Langford, I have a society there called the Couch and Women Against Violence Society, and they are obviously there to help women who are affected by violence, to help them seek shelter, get out of abusive relationships. If someone was to take issue with the work they do and spray paint graffiti on their place of work, I'm just not sure if we're casting a wide enough net. So, okay, that's good to hear. The way I've read your bill, you've included these specific areas where hate-based mischief can happen. I was wondering what your rationale was for deciding to list these additional types of property beyond houses of worship, instead of just treating all hate-based mischief offenses, regardless of where they take place, the same. What was your rationale for taking that approach?
When I looked at that criminal subsection, that was very specific to religious properties.
Mm-hmm.
So my thing was that I too thought it would be good to go very specific into the places where the community gathers and where the community will get affected by these hate-based crimes. That was the rationale behind what I defined or included in the list of properties.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And then, like the way the bill is drafted, just going down that same vein, it seems that like if someone were to spray paint racist insults on a park bench in a playground, that theoretically could be considered worse if you did so on someone's private home. For example, can you explain to the committee why those types of mischief should be treated differently? Like if someone knew someone's private home, like that person was transgender or followed a certain religion and decided to create mischief at their personal home, they would get a lighter sentence there than if they did it at a public place.
Yeah, I understand. You know, the effect is the same. The impact on the communities, number one, on the family, their friends, their relatives, and the entire community, the effect is the same. They should be treated equally, but I was given advice that including a private property will go much beyond the scope of this particular section.
Okay, okay. So in the proposed section 430, subsection 4.101C, you refer to buildings or structures that are used for administrative activities or events. Like, is this limited sort of like to public administration or to administration more generally? Do you see a need for having to provide a definition for additional clarification there, or
no?
You want to leave it more for broader interpretation?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. And I guess you know, you've already had the questions about what Mr. Casey proposed. He stated that the underlying rationale for section 430, subsection 4.1, is to protect freedom of religion. Do you think that is the case?
Now, in my view, it should not get limited to religious properties alone.
Okay, yeah. And, okay. I think that's just about all I have for questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGregor. We're going to go to Mr. Fraser.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here, Mr. Area, and for your good work on this bill and for your clear and articulate presentation today. I'd like to ask a question that's been touched on by a couple other questioners with regard to adding gender expression and language consistent with Bill C-16, which is currently before the Senate. I know that when we considered another piece of legislation, we added a coordinating amendment so that if that bill becomes law, that we'd be in using the same sort of language. Would you be open to that sort of coordinating amendment depending on which bill, if either one or both become law? Would you be open to having that added as an amendment?
Absolutely.
Okay, so there's no issue at all then with coordinating all of the language?
Yep.
All right. I want to touch on, first of all, I'd like to hear you talk about the current state of the law right now. If someone were charged with mischief and convicted of that and underwent sentencing, I mean, it's true that as an aggravating factor on sentencing, the place where the mischief took place and the motivation behind it can be considered as an aggravating factor on sentencing. Can you explain a little bit as to why that's not sufficient, that you see an insufficiency there in the law right now with considering those things as an aggravating factor for mischief?
The very fact that this subsection was inserted in fact shows that we have to highlight and separate certain things that are much more hateful, much more those things that affects the community much more than under any other subsection. That's why this particular subsection was brought forward in 2001. However, when it was brought in then, it limited to religious properties. In my view, that should have been made to religious and public properties.
Okay.
Yeah.
With one of the things that's very important in the law, of course, is certainty and clarity to ensure that people understand the definition of the prohibited offense, but also what could be the consequence. So in that regard, clarity of language is important. Do you know of any problem in the current section 4.1 with naming religious places of worship or part thereof and all of that? Has there ever been a case that you know of where there's been any problem for the courts to interpret those, or that there's been an argument made that it wasn't clear whether or not it was primarily for the purpose of religious worship?
Personally, I'm not aware of any particular case.
Okay. Do you see any issue, or do you have any concern over expanding this to include other buildings and partial structures and making it broader in language so that people wouldn't have clarity or certainty about whether they would fall under this section of the law. Have you turned your mind
I'm
to that?
open to that, yes.
No, but do you know, have you had any thought about whether or not the law would become less clear if we started adding all of these other structures? Is that a concern at all to you?
Not that, no, I don't think, I'm not talked in those lines, but I don't think that should be a matter of concern.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about one of the important things in considering an appropriate sentence is deterrence. And obviously we're talking about including a larger swath here so people would be subject to a higher penalty, hopefully with the consequence of deterring these sorts of crimes from happening. Can you talk a little bit about why that would be important for deterring certain future activity and whether you think it would act generally so it would be understood that these sort of offenses are not permissible?
As I mentioned that hate crimes, to eradicate it, law by itself is not sufficient. Education is also important. However, education and the law should go hand in hand. Whenever there is a threat of a very severe punishment, that will change the habits of man, that will change the habits of perpetrators. A strong law sends a strong message that we will not tolerate these hate-based crimes. I think that is much more important here.
All right, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fraser. So we've done one round. Let's ask if anybody has shorter questions. Mr. Falk?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Arya, for coming to committee today and for the work that you've put into this piece. I have a question, and I'm going to build on what Mr. McGregor and also Mr. Fraser talked about, and that's in section 4.1 of your private members bill. Why they've talked about coordinating amendments if Bill C-16 would ever become law. That isn't a law, but we do have a document today that is law, and that's the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And in section 15.1 and 2, it makes specific reference to categories that cannot be discriminated against. Why would your bill not include this similar language or the exact language that is used in the Charter?
Good question. Honestly speaking, I don't know, but this can be considered.
So you'd be open to an amendment?
I am open to amendments, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Other shorter questions? If not, I have a couple if it's okay.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Who? Oh, Mr. Bayless. So, Mr. Bayless, please go ahead, sir.
Well, first of all, it's
This is your first question at this committee, so it better be excellent.
I will do my best.
Your reputation precedes you. I'm sure it will.
There it is. That perplexed look on my face, I can explain it. No. First of all, I'd like to say I sit on the industry committee with Mr. Chandra Arya, and he's always looking to make sure that we take into account diversity, ethnic questions, cultural, gender, that when we're drafting our laws there or whatever, that we take this into account. And I also know, I've seen it personally, that in the greater Ottawa area, many minority communities hold him in high respect, so I would like to underline that. When I look at this, and I'm not a lawyer, I understand you're trying to expand the definition of a building, and I'm questioning, why do we have to have a building? For example, in my riding, WIPCA, West Island Black Community Association, it's and I know it says here we're trying to protect against race. It's a community for race, black community. So if someone were to go there and do hate crimes on that building, they would not be subject to this, nor would your amendments make them subject, or would they?
No, in my bill, they will be subject to.
In your change, those buildings.
In the current subsection, it is not covered.
Okay.
In my bill, it is covered.
It would. So that building. Now, let's say that people go to that, but then they go home, and someone has the same graffiti on their home. That would not be covered.
No, that would not be covered.
So I struggle to understand why we have to limit. If a hate crime is a hate crime, why would we limit it? Okay, I did the exact same thing on the WIPCA building, but then I just went and did it on their homes of each person that went into the building. That's not a hate crime, but the building is. And I was wondering, did you consider just removing completely?
No, that's a good question. That is a question I asked myself. I was advised that we cannot go into the private properties in this particular bill. Yeah.
You would have liked to, but you're not allowed to.
I would have loved to.
I see. Thank you.
I have a few questions, if it's okay with the committee, just to clarify your intent, Mr. Arya. So first of all, again, thank you for an excellent effort at a draft of a bill. that really goes to a commendable purpose. So my understanding right now is you're looking at all of the things that we will eventually have in 4.1. You took the current list and you added a few. You're open to this committee looking at other documents and broadening it, or or changing the scope. But there will be, let's say, protected classes. And then what you are saying is that irrespective of the type of public building, where there is an act that is mischief because of hatred motivated by dislike of that protected class, it's covered. So at the City Hall, if there's a swastika, it will be considered an act of mischief or hate because it's a public building. And so let me ask just a few questions. I read Mr. Casey's, the parliamentary secretary at the Times, comments, and he was suggesting that this be restricted to religious buildings, meaning he said it's okay if it's now a church, synagogue, mosque, or mandir or whatever, and if it's a community center owned by one of those communities or leased by one of those communities, it would be okay. But if it was, for example, a community center leased by the black community or the gay community, it wouldn't be protected. Was that your intent, or is that totally opposite to what your intent is?
That's the problem, Mr. Chair, I had with Mr. Casey's thing. As I always take the example of the school. We have got two major school systems here. If we go according to what Mr. Casey said, that a hate crime against the Catholic school board schools is going to get covered, but not the hate crimes against the district school board school. So for me, that is unacceptable.
I understand, but just to clarify first for me, right?
Yeah.
I understand that, but let's take two analogous situations.
Yeah.
A community center owned by the Mennonite community is defaced. You intend that to be covered.
Absolutely.
But my understanding is you equally intend that to be covered if it's owned by the black community or the gay community or any other of these classes.
Yeah.
And you're not asking us to distinguish one from the other.
No. In fact, in my bill, the ownership is not defined or directed. No.
And I understand, and it may be that we need to say owned, leased, or occupied by or something, but I do understand.
Yep.
And let me just understand the purpose. For example, I think perhaps the original intention of the law many, many years ago, 2001 I think was when it was first adopted, this section putting in property. You talk about a crime against the community, and I understand that. I think perhaps there was a feeling that if, for example, you defaced a church, and it was because of a bias against that religious congregation, that would affect that congregation more than if you wrote that same symbol at the City Hall. And so I don't know what direction, I understand what you're saying, absolutely, but did you consider perhaps that it should be limited to buildings that are actually, and I understand and I agree that with what my colleague said, that if there was a shopping center and a church lease space in a shopping center, that it should be covered too, because even though the main building is not a church, the church is still in the shopping center, everybody knows where the church is. So, would you understand if it was somehow limited to only being locations where the crime was actually a crime against that community because it was that community that occupied the space?
No, I think if my understanding is right, you're mentioning, when you say community, you're mentioning about the religious community.
Or racial, or any of the communities protected under the bill.
No, my thing is very clear. Any hate-based crimes it is not limited to just the community. It will not affect the community only when it is against a religious place or property. Any place where the community gathers, it can be a community center, a cultural center, or a school, when this crime is committed against the property, the effect and result is the same. That's what we are trying to address here.
I understand. And I just want to distinguish one more thing. When you're saying the word public building, you are not saying, in my understanding of what you're saying or how I read the proposed bill, that public building necessarily needs to be owned by the state. It could be a building that is owned by a religious community, a building that is owned by any group, but it's used by the public at large or a certain community of the public at large and not a private dwelling.
Absolutely, correct.
Thank you. Those are my questions. Any further questions? Mr. Sarai.
This will be my first question in this committee as well.
And I'm sure you're going to outdo Mr. Bayless.
That Mr. Biddle did so, or Sir Mr. Bailey did, so I will go on my own. My question is, it's a little quirky. If a person vandalizes a Christian school by graffitiing a slogan like, "I hate school," or "School sucks," would that fall under this proposed legislation?
No.
Okay. My second question is also, what if a bias is a religious or ethnic bias is written against a place of worship that's of the opposite or of a different faith? For example, if it's targeted towards Muslims but it's on a Hindu temple, would that fall under this or not?
Yes.
Okay, those are my two questions.
Very much. Excellent questions. Mr. Cooper.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And just to pick up with some of the other lines of questioning from other members, you very clearly indicated, and I fully support, closing the loophole in the criminal code when it comes to targeting certain types of religious property, whether it be houses of worship, whether it be a religious community center or religious school. So I support that objective, and it makes sense in terms of the purpose of this section, which is in mischief in relation to religious property. But are we not creating really another inconsistency here if based upon the wording of your bill? Mr. Casey, in his submission to the House, made reference to a coffee shop, that it might include a coffee shop. Well, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Suppose it doesn't fit in to the language of your bill, and suppose you commit an act of hate directed towards a specific group at a synagogue. Under this, you'd be subject to 10 years of imprisonment. If it was at a school, you'd be up to potentially 10 years of imprisonment, but perhaps at a coffee shop doing the very same thing, you would be subject again to 2 years. So is that not creating an inconsistency, another inconsistency? And then the other part of the other question I would have is if the objective of the bill is to simply condemn acts of hate directed at groups writ large, then what do you say about Section 718.1 of the Criminal Code, which that would constitute an aggravating factor for the purpose of sentencing? So does that not have a deleterious impact on Section 718.1?
In fact, when you first said that if the same crime is committed against coffee shop, that is not covered here. Well, as I said, my objective is to cover as wide thing as possible, but I was advised that not everything can be covered under one single subsection or one single piece of legislation. As I said in my remarks, my bill will not try to solve or address every single issue related to hate crimes or related to discrimination or racism. This is just one part of the bigger picture. And you at the Justice Committees, I think you are all well placed to address these issues.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Bayless, last question? Last question,
quick
Mr.
one.
Bayless.
Could you, like this coffee shop idea, there's certain coffee shops that are frequented by certain communities. For example, an Italian coffee shop in an Italian area, and someone goes and writes something against Italians, that's a hate crime against Italians. Could it not be an easier wording just to say a building associated with a certain community? Was that something, so a public building associated with a community that's being protected? Whether it's rented, owned, leased, frequented?
Whether rented, owned, rented or leased, I'm not very sure, but in my definition, the public properties in terms of community centers, cultural centers are covered, but private business like the coffee shop, they are not covered.
Mr. McGregor.
I'll just follow up on that line of questioning, and I'll go back to Section 4.101C, just back to the administrative part, because you say here, it's a building or structure or any part of a building or structure that's primarily used for administrative activities. So, there are a lot of buildings that are used for administrative activities. CIBC does administrative activities. It's a private business.
Yeah.
Every business does administrative activities. That's a very broad term. So if something is done that is motivated by those biases, is that net capturing those private businesses?
No,
now?
that was not the intent of the bill. It was only for
But do you have
public.
concerns because that definition of administrative?
I know.
Right. That's.
I understand that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay.
but as I private, it was not intent of the
It was
bill to
not the
cover
intention to do
yeah.
that. Okay.
Thank you. Mr. McKinnon.
Thank you, Chair. One more question about scope. So I understand here from paragraph C, a building or structure, you know, for all these purposes, or things associated with that structure on the, presumably on the grounds, would be covered. So if you had a park, a public park that had a camp shelter on it for barbecues and so forth, then all the benches and everything else, everything basically in the park would be covered. But if you had a public park that had no such structure, nothing would be covered. Is that how you would read this?
Interesting. I think that is not covered in the bill as I see it.
Okay, so it needs to be tied to a building or structure in order to activate the increased penalty.
You commit a crime, then
Yeah.
it's still a crime. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. I think that was a really, really interesting and an excellent exchange. So I want to thank Mr. Arya for having come before us today. Thank you so much for your excellent presentation, and we look forward to studying the bill that you've proposed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Meeting adjourned.